Welcome to A Better HR Business, the podcast that looks at how HR consultants and HR tech firms grow their businesses and how they help their employers to get the best out of their people. Remember, for show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Okay, let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Great to have you along. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Mickie Kennedy. Mickie is the president and founder of a very cool company called eReleases, which is all about helping businesses in the HR workplace-related world to grow via press releases. I've used that kind of approach in the past, and it can have a really powerful effect. So I'm really keen to learn all about it. But firstly, Mickie, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
Excellent. And whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Baltimore County, Maryland.
Nice. Okay, lovely part of the world. Very good. So yeah, for people listening to this, they might be going, what a press release is all about. And I thought that's just something that Coca-Cola does when they have a new flavor or something like that. And how can smaller businesses use it, early stage HR software companies or SME consulting firms, things like that. I've got some opinions and things like that. But firstly, could you give us an overview of what an e-press release system is and does?
Right. So eReleases originally started as sending press releases to the media through email. And I started about 27 years ago. And so we have changed over time. Now all of our releases go out nationally over PR Newswire, which is the oldest and largest newswire of press releases in the U.S. And in the U.S., it's predominantly a duopoly, but shared between Business Wire and PR Newswire. You don't need to go to both. You just choose whichever one works best for you. They're very expensive. For example, PR Newswire charges over $1,700 to move a 600-word press release nationally. And Business Wire's right behind as far as the expense. We offer that same exact distribution, a national distribution over PR Newswire for substantially less. You pay about a third of the price. With a new customer special coming on, probably be closer to a quarter of the price. So it's a huge price savings. The caveat is you have to be a small business or a startup or maybe an author or basically someone that their sales team at PR Newswire would not target or be interested in. And they're looking for clients who can comfortably spend $20,000 to $30,000 a year or more. And so this population of people that I serve are generally spending $2,000 a year with PR. So their budgets, of course, are much smaller. And, given our relationship and the fact that I've carved out helping the small businesses they don't want to work directly with, I mostly just am open to working with entrepreneurs and startups and those people that I'd mentioned before. But my best value is the education I provide. If everyone looks at the types of releases that all the big companies send out and try to do the same thing, they're going to find that they don't get media pickup. And the reality is very few of the big companies do, other than those who feel they have to cover the Coca-Colas and Googles of the world. And so the types of press releases that smaller businesses should be doing are the ones that are more strategic. They're the ones that involve more creativity and really try to peel back the layers to create an exciting story. And, you don't have to be like cutting edge to create a vibrant story, but you have to be creative. And so, for example, we get product launch press releases and new service announcements quite common, but they often don't get picked up. And when people say, hey, what happened here? This is important to us. And I'm like, yeah, just because it's important to you because you're rolling out a new product, you didn't make it important to the audience. And so a journalist has to decide, is this a story that their audience is going to either be educated by or entertained by, or a little bit of both? And you didn't really do that. You said, here's a new product, here's a list of features, and here's a page to learn more or buy it. And, one of the easiest ways that you can inject the entertainment value as tied in also with education is put an amazing use case study. This product didn't come to market without getting some feedback. What was someone's experience who used it and had a very favorable outcome? You could take a company, let's say you have a logistics software solution that you're rolling out, and you have a company that is 3 years old. They've lost money every year, which is quite common for new companies. And they started using your product and writing invoices using it. And after 90 days, they're projected to have a 5% net profit at the end of the year. That's a big outcome and a big reversal. And you can even take a publicly available data point, like what's the failure rate in your industry in the first 5 years? Based on most industries, it's probably close to 2/3. And if you get that exact number and cite it and say, hey, 67% of new transportation companies fail in the first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability. And in fact, this company looked like it was going to be yet another casualty. And here was the outcome after using our product. It's like, whoa, this shows a real demonstrative effect of using your software. And then have a quote by them talking about, we knew we were a startup, we knew we were losing money, and we were just hoping that eventually we'd win enough contracts that we would achieve profitability. And what I realized is we could have unlimited contracts, but if we don't make money on every one of them, we're going to eventually have to fold. And we didn't realize that writing invoices more intelligently allowed us to know at what point we just stopped negotiating with clients because there's no longer any profit in it. And, maybe you say that more succinctly, a little more active verbs, but having an amazing quote by the client talking about the product really can sell something. So now a journalist, and journalists are naturally storytellers. They have a natural story arc to incorporate and tantalize their audience saying, hey, here's a new product, but hey, let me tell you this story, how it turned around this company. It looked like it was going to fail. And look at this vibrant, amazing outcome. And here's a great quote by them. All of a sudden, that's something that a lot of journalists would love to share with their audience. And so don't write selfishly. Don't write as like me. Think about the audience. Think about the journalist who has to decide, is this going to tip the scales to that my audience are really going to feel that this matters? So make it matter to the audience. And one of the best ways to do it is to tell a compelling story. Sometimes it's a story about how you were founded. There's a reason that, here in the U.S., everybody that appears on Shark Tank, and I think they have those in most countries, versions of it, They don't immediately jump into their numbers and what this company could potentially do or has done. It's them. I lost my father. And we had this little hobby business, and I just got laid off. And you're like, oh, sucker punch. They lost someone, then they got laid off. All of a sudden, we're like, we care. And it's natural to care. We naturally have this empathy towards other humans. And it's one of the most powerful things that we can put into our stories. And all of a sudden, that's what gets us caring about this business and hoping that they get backed. And even if they don't get backed, there's this huge upswell of sales that always happens after someone appears on one of these shows because we care and we want them to succeed. We want to give them a little push along the way of encouragement. And that's completely natural. And, eBay, when it launched, they had in the early 2000s all these stories about this programmer who had a fiance or girlfriend who had a Pez collection she was trying to get rid of. So he said, I'll just create some software to sell it sort of like an auction format. And that's how eBay got started. It's not a real story. It turns out that a PR firm created it. It shows the magic of story and why we're so intrigued by it and we get suckered into it. That story, I saw it in Red Herring. I saw it in Wired. I saw it in New York Times. Everybody ran with that story because it was something that, all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, only a nerdy programmer would say, let me solve this by creating a whole new platform for you. But it's a beautiful story. And, stories are the currency of the media. And so, what is it about your story? What is it about your company? It could be a founding story. It could be a story about a customer and using your product. Those are really valuable things. I find that a lot of my clients come in as startups or solo side businesses. They're hoping to get off the ground and maybe leave their day job. And they don't want to appear small. They want you to believe they could be a company of 20 people. And I feel like that's missing an opportunity because the journalists like to spotlight new discoveries. They like to put the spotlight on businesses that no one knows about. And so being small and unknown in your field is actually an advantage. It makes a journalist more likely to cover you because those are the stories that get shared the most. And those are the stories that people report favorable reactions to because everyone knows the big companies in your industry. And staying on top of them is something you have to do, but they don't get accolades for that. But when they talk about, hey, you talked about this new software solution and it really solves a pain point in my industry, thank you. I didn't even know they existed. I'd never heard of them. those are the stories that journalists get the most appreciation for. So, being small and upfront about your size is not a disadvantage. It makes you more endearing, and it makes people want to care about you more.
It's like the David versus Goliath story, we're rooting for the little guy. And you covered so much ground there, such fascinating stuff. And I had this image in my mind when you're talking about people when they're doing these press releases, that they'll try and come at it from an angle that isn't of interest to them. And this image in my mind was of a little kid drawing a picture. It's like, to them, it's the best picture in the world, but maybe it's not going to go onto the wall of an art gallery at the Louvre or something like that. And so you're suggesting it's just critical to think about from whether it be the journalist or their consumers, their point of view. And I think that's a challenge when you get, for instance, in the consulting world, because the number one sin that I see in the press release side of things is, we have a new website, maybe we should do a press release about it. I'm going, no, how is that interesting? You have new colors and a new logo. Fascinating. Tell me the history about the development of the logo. Please do not. What's your advice to consulting firms, particularly, for instance, like employee engagement, HR consulting? Maybe they have a new service line or they've expanded their service offerings. Maybe what's a dry area?
I think that when it comes to HR, one of the biggest things we see is, new hires and wanting to roll out a press release for them. It makes the employees feel special and things like that. And you can still accomplish that. But I think a better result is, rather than spending money to go out over the newswire, is to take a headshot and maybe even offer an updated headshot. Here's a couple $100 for this local person we work with. We'd love to get you a professional headshot. Like, oh, that makes me feel special. And, get that headshot, send it to your local paper, local business publication, and maybe a couple of key industry trade magazines. And they generally have a section on the move. There's usually an email address or an upload right there. And as long as they have the room, they generally cover you. It's not very competitive. And it does make someone feel really special when they do get picked up like that.
Yeah. Are you saying do that manually yourself? Don't waste a press release for it. Just go and do it.
Yeah, just do it. If you think about it, it's probably less than 10 people in your market that would cover you for something like that. Just reach out to them, send the bio and a little bit of information. You don't even have to have a whole press release, and just send it along. And you'll probably have a higher pickup rate. And the employees usually feel like this is really special and really nice.
And so for people listening, earlier you were speaking, for instance, about a logistics software company and bringing in a customer or a client case study and some quotes and some statistics. So I love that. And in the workplace HR world, we have things like employee turnover, employee engagement. Maybe there's new business won because you've got better performance from the people and stuff. So there's things you can talk about. There's certainly statistics. In the HR world, people throw around the famous Gallup company, the statistics on employee engagement. I feel they're a bit done to death. So be careful using those sort of things. But I loved what you were saying about trying to find something you've done with some client companies on how you've boosted their employee engagement, which meant that they've opened up whole new product lines or ways of engaging the journalist and the readers. But that's what I'm getting at. For people listening to this, they've got to look for those angles that will get people to click through and read that piece, right?
Right. And if you're doing something a little bit different at your company than others, that's also something that you can definitely tailor in a message, especially to local media. Local media loves covering companies that are doing something a little bit different, like how you're, doing your workplace culture. In my backyard, we have the Baltimore Sun. They've covered a company that instead of happy hour a couple of times a week, they actually do volunteers at a local soup kitchen. And they got photos of that and the employees looking really good and giving back to the community. Is there something that you're doing a little bit differently? Now's a good opportunity for people who are trying to navigate these hybrid work environments where people want to be home and not in the office every single day. If you're doing something that's a little bit different, where you're trying to better balance it, that's another thing that you could potentially get some candid photos and send it particularly to local media. You might be able to do something with some trade publications as well. There's a lot of things around HR. And I think that, some of the best HR experiences are where it's not antagonistic and they're trying to find a balance between the people and management. And sometimes how you navigate that middle ground is really interesting. And people love to hear about it. And they're just like, yeah, it seems really reasonable what this company is doing and, what their solution is. And these are perspectives that I think a lot of people in the HR world would appreciate and just like to get feedback on. And so those kinds of things where you are the use case study can do really well.
Yeah, I love that. So can I shift the focus into two things? One is the practical side of what is an e-press release, how to actually do this thing. And then secondly, with the customers, clients that you have and you work with and you support, you've mentioned you give great advice and help produce the best results. But just say they've got a finite budget. Maybe it's big, maybe it's small, but how do they use that allocation? We've established it's not for a new website, and maybe it's not the new hire because you can do that in different ways, but is it around maybe we do a few a year and we use certain topics or themes? So firstly, the practicalities. So from my perspective, you log in and then you've got something you pre-write. It has to go into a certain format. Can you talk us through that? And then let's have a look at that budget allocation.
Sure. So basically, there's a type of format that almost all press releases follow. Even if you don't follow it and upload a release with us, we'll generally try to put it in shape for you and then get you to sign off on, like, is this okay? Or I'm just put it in AP style with a date line and city and state and all of this information. There's a headline, opening paragraph. It generally moves from the most important aspect to the least important aspect. Sometimes there's a boilerplate at the end where it's like about company name, and that usually gets recycled and used a little paragraph, 2 to 3 sentences, elevator pitch of what your business is all about, and then a media contact. And that's pretty much it. There is the opportunity to upload 2 images, and I think candid photos work really well. The days of the old stock photos or professionally shot photos, they don't really work well with engagement. And a lot of media are putting these articles and these images on the websites, and they know that the ones that people navigate to photo-wise are the ones that are just more candid, the product on a messy desk rather than on blue velvet, professionally lit or anything like that. So I like that because it makes it easier for small businesses to compete, and you don't need a professional 35 millimeter camera or SLR camera or anything like what you shoot on your phone. A modern phone is usually more than adequate for the photos that these places would be able to work with. We have templates on our website. If you look in the footer of our website, eReleases.com, they're there. They're pretty simple, and AI is something that you can lean on to write a press release. You're not writing the finished product. We're looking for a journalist to transform that, take that as the building blocks to craft a unique article. And so it's not like you're writing the end product, you're writing the press release. And so I get that writing isn't everybody's strong suit, especially small businesses and HR professionals who are having to juggle lots of different things. But don't lean on AI to choose the subject of what you're writing about, because it's been trained on all of the press releases that are out there. And I am not exaggerating when I say 97% of press releases that get issued on the wire will not generate earned media. They will not get turned into articles. So, focus on the strategic types of press releases, the ones that I go into on my website. I have a free class that is an hour long that teaches you the strategic types of press releases you should be considering. And anybody interested, that's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. Completely free, less than an hour commitment, and you will know the types of releases that represent the 3% that you can reproduce and do that are meaningful. The story arc is one of them, doing story-based things like injecting a use case or telling your story or the founder's story or something like that, or the story of someone who's come and is working for you and joining as part of the executive team. They're an industry veteran. Share their story, and make it sort of suspenseful and interesting.
You know what, Mickie, if I pause you there 1 second, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of several founders I know of different HR-related, workplace-related companies. Like I know in one business, the leader, when she was an employee of a company, suffered from harassment in the workplace, and so set up a place that creates positive work environments. But I would think that the majority of, certainly consultants in the workplace world, we've all experienced bad workplaces, good workplaces. And so, it was the experience of the one place where everyone was clashing with each other. I realized we need a communications team, culture, organization setup, or whatever it may be. But there are so many stories and they work, don't they? It's the founder story. It's that human element that you were talking about earlier. Can I switch to, the planning out budget, or when do I use this thing? So I'm not going to do a press release every day, but maybe I've got some money allocated I could use this for. How do they assign that money?
The distribution through eReleases is predominantly, there's 3 price points. We do have a new customer special, and you can buy a package of releases at that special promotional price when you come in. We also do like a sale twice a year. So basically, for most people, it works out to be approximately $500 to $600 for distribution of a press release. And so I think that most businesses should try to strive to do at least a press release quarterly. Maybe we're looking at a budget of $2,400, a year. And maybe you feel like you could do more than that. Maybe you could do every other month. So maybe that would get it to $3,600 or something along those lines. But I think that, it's a budget that's doable for a lot of people. I don't think that it's the type of thing where I would suggest, especially small businesses, to do them 2 to 3 times a month. I think that's just overkill. That being said, I do have some businesses that are always doing little projects, and they're always popping up, and they're always, I feel like, newsworthy. And so there are instances where I have had a couple of clients who are doing 30 press releases a year, and it's relevant for them because they're doing so many side vertical type of little projects that they're launching. But, I think for the average business, striving for quarterly, at least maybe every other month, is something that I think that people should try to put a budget on and be able to devote to.
Got it. In terms of content calendar, you might say that one of those 4, one of those 8, one of those 12, one might be around some economic news and be ready for it. You jump on it. So you've got something almost pre-written. Something might be, let's say you do a half-yearly report on something. That could be a juicy thing, right?
Yeah, if you have milestones that are coming out over the next 12 months, incorporate that into your content calendar. Like maybe you're up refreshing the product and doing a relaunch. Maybe you're presenting at a conference, or someone's presenting at a conference about a really cool topic. There could be something around that. So take natural milestones as they appear and put them in that calendar. But then the holes are the opportunities for you to be creative. You can put together something that's interesting, or you see a trend in something that's happening in your industry. And that is the one thing that I talk about in strategy, is that a lot of people feel like that's an opportunity for you to join the conversation. And that's usually not the truth. They call that newsjacking.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah, if something's trending in your industry, you join the conversation. And what people don't understand is, when this term was coined years ago, it became outmoded almost as soon as it was launched, because it was too much of a good thing. The Target credit card breach, which was many, many years ago, I recall looking up because someone said, maybe I should do a press release about that as a security consultant. And I'm like, I don't think so. I counted with them over 1,400 press releases in the past 30 days that mentioned Target and that they were a security consultant. But what works really well is, there a contrarian viewpoint that you can put out there on top of that trend right now? Journalists like to be fair and balanced. And in the case of the Target credit card breach, there was 1,400 press releases competing for maybe 50 stories. But every one of these 50 stories has the potential to be fair and balanced and present 2 sides of an issue. And if you're the only one presenting the contrarian viewpoint, you stand the likelihood you could be in all 50 articles. Now, the likelihood is very low, but maybe 12 of those articles will pick you up because you're the only one that raised their hand and said, hey, I think that most businesses shouldn't even think about their credit card security. If you're using Authorize.net or VeriSign or any of these numbers of shopping carts, you're not personally holding their information. You're not personally liable for any of this. And this is something that, if you're a giant corporation and you choose to retain that person's credit card information, you are liable for this. But as long as you're using these shopping carts and you're using Authorize.net, you probably have 0 things to worry about. So now you stand the likelihood of being plugged in to all of these people who are saying, here's someone who's saying something alarmist as a consultant, and here's someone saying, settle down, settle down. For the majority of you, this is a non-concern. If you're Amazon, Target, the Walmarts, the giant corporations of the world, yeah, you probably should worry, but they've got people to worry for them. The average company, the average small and medium-sized business, you probably have 0 things to worry about in concerns to this credit card breach or anything like that happening to you. And that's something that you do stand the likelihood of getting plugged in more places. But anytime you take a contrarian viewpoint, I always tell people, make sure it's not contrarian to the point that it's going to hurt your relationship with your existing customers, because it's easy to take a stand just to be a contrarian, the devil's advocate view. But if that alienates you with your own customers, you will have a serious problem.
Exactly. You still want to be taken seriously. I agree with that. We've kind of dived into the topic, but I never really said at the start to people listening that for me, the two big benefits are around PR, as in getting public relations, press relations, exposure. Maybe journalists write about you, talk about you. These days, maybe some TikTok person will do a dance about you, but it's about getting your business talked about or you talked about and so on. And then the other aspect, I don't know if it's as important, who knows, but the SEO aspect, that if you do get these articles written about you or your topics and things like that, that Google, ChatGPT, AI, search engines, let's call them, can start to surface your content. Would that be a fair summary, those two, PR and the SEO?
Absolutely. When you get articles written about you, it improves your SEO, even if they do not have a link to your website. Google has a patent for that. It's called an implied implicit link. And they give you credit when the New York Times talks about you, and they can contextually tell this refers to your business by name and the context of the keywords matches your business. They'll give you an implied link and credit from coming from this giant source, New York Times, or a very applicable trade magazine that writes about you. They give you that implied credit. And then, like you had mentioned with these AIs that are out there, they use press releases specifically. They spider the wires and they see people there and they know this is very topical, because if you've done a press release in the last 90 days, they know that's not old news. They're putting currently a lot more weight on recent news that you're releasing over PR Newswire and Business Wire and places like that. So it really is probably more important today to just sort of put a constant diet of press releases out there on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or every other month.
What are the odds of something getting picked up? Or is it a case of, you're just sending out press releases and no one hears them, you're just shouting into the darkness? What's the success rate, or what can people expect?
Sure. So people who look at my class, the free masterclass, and follow that and do 6 to 8 releases, generally 2 of those press releases will generate earned media, which means if you're doing 6 to 8 releases, unfortunately 4 to 6 of them, nothing happens. But, it only takes a very meaningful pickup to make a huge difference for a business. I've had one media pickup result in one perfect customer for a client that turned into over $60 million. They create waste management facilities. They had an article just introducing them to the world saying, hey, we create the whole facility for companies. And they were contacted by a municipality in Australia and said, can you ship your facilities here? And they go, yeah, we put them on barges and we ship them. We've done India and other places. And they did 3 facilities for this municipality, over $60 million. I think it started out at $40 million, and eventually they added the 3rd facility. And so the huge, meaningful difference with just one customer. But for a lot of people, it just means more leads coming in, more sales. And when you take that earned media and you share it with your leads, it will increase your conversion rate, because what happens when we read an article written by someone else, it's almost like social proof or implied endorsement. Like you've passed a test when a journalist chooses to write about you. And that credibility is like a signal of trust. And so if you put that in front of your leads and they see it, and maybe your conversion rate is 20% of your leads convert, all of a sudden putting these earned media in front of them will maybe get that to 25 or 30%. So that's, going from 20% to 30%, that's a 50% increase in conversion rates. The same thing with churn. You always lose a certain percentage of customers, usually at a predictable rate. And what you'll find is that's often because someone has taken over the role and they feel like I have to now vet everybody they were using before and put my stamp on it that this is a good company. And very few are willing to take a risk and switch vendors if all of a sudden they get an article that you were just mentioned in favorably and they're like, yeah, I might be seen as having made a mistake to move away from this type of company. And so that is going to improve your churn rate as a result, but it also should generate sales and conversions. And if you are continuing to do strategic types of releases, you will find ones that you can sometimes replicate again and again. The type of press release that always gets earned media that I go into in my masterclass is a survey. If you do an industry survey and ask questions that are relevant right now, people generally want to know the answer to that, and they want to talk about that. It's easy to get a population of people to take the survey. You can partner with lots of independent and smaller trade associations and get them to send that survey link to their members, often by just saying, hey, I'm doing the survey. Could you send this to your members? If so, I'm looking for 100 responses at least, and I will mention you in a press release that'll be going out nationally over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. They see that as a win-win because the smaller and independent trade associations, generally a lot of people don't even know about them, and they're out there in every industry. We generally know the big ones, the ones that sponsor the concerts, but the small ones are great to partner with, and they usually have 500 to 700 members and more, and so they're perfect for this type of outreach.
I love it. Well, Mickie, you've given us so much great information and advice. You mentioned a course or a masterclass.
Yeah, free masterclass. That's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN, completely free. And you can get through that in less than an hour long video. There's some accompanying materials to help as well. And I think it's a great place for anybody to start because it tells you, hey, of the 3% of press releases that do get picked up, there's patterns that can almost be applied to any type of business and department. And I think that that's really exciting.
So if you're listening to this on the go, check out www.ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. But yeah, the link will be in the show notes there and you can check it out. Yeah, I love what you're doing, Mickie, and I don't really like the word democratizing, but you're kind of opening up the e-release world to the SME market, which is a fabulous thing to be doing. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us today on A Better HR Business, the podcast that explores the world of HR consulting and HR tech businesses. For show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Remember to subscribe and share the show with any friends who are busy growing a HR business. Thanks and see you next time.